Did God really create the world in 6 literal days? This is the big question. Few questions stir more discussion among Christians and skeptics alike than this one. Did God really create the heavens, the earth in 6 literal days, as it says in Genesis 1? Some argue that creation, the account is symbolic, while others hold firmly to a more historical reading of the text. To answer this question fairly, we need to examine the biblical testimony, meaning of the Hebrew text, and the theological significance of God's creative work. I'm Chris San Rocco, and let's start by discussing what Genesis actually says. Genesis opens with these words, Genesis 1:1, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." From there, the chapter outlines 6 days of creative activity. Each day ends with the phrase, "And there was evening and there was morning," the first day. Genesis 1:5. We see this in this repeated refrain. It's not accidental. A pattern of time, which is evening followed by morning, which is a typical way of describing a literal day in ancient Hebrew culture. The Hebrew word for day used in Genesis 1 is yom. In most contexts, this refers to a normal 24-hour day, especially when paired with numbers, first day, second day, etc. While yom can sometimes mean a longer period, the way it is used in Genesis strongly supports the idea of literal ordinary days. The testimony of the rest of Scripture, very important, of course. Genesis is not the only place that speaks about the length of creation. We see this in Exodus 20, verse 11. God himself uses the creation account as the foundation for the Sabbath command. "For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, made it holy." This verse, it's critical. In 6 days of creation, if they were long ages or merely symbolic, then the parallel to the 6th day work week, followed by 1 day of rest, would essentially lose its force. God's command to Israel assumes that his creation week was a pattern of literal days. The New Testament writers often affirm the historical accuracy of Genesis. We see this, Jesus himself refers to the beginning of creation when teaching about marriage. We see this in Mark 10. "But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female." So Christ's words assume a real historical creation, man and woman present from the start, not after billions of years of evolutionary processes. The theological weight of literal days, talk about this a little bit. Believing in a 6th day creation is not just about arguing science or even language. It's about understanding God's character and his purposes. So let's start with God's power. The 6th day creation demonstrates that God does not need long ages to accomplish his work. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all their host. We see this in Psalm 33. Creation was a display of divine power, not a slow unfolding dependent on chance. Number 2 is God's order. The structure sequence of 6 days reveals a God of order and intentionality. Each day builds upon the previous, culminating in humanity, made in God's image. You see this in Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Number 3 is God's rest. The 7th day is a literal day of rest. Points forward to a greater reality. Hebrews 4 connects the Sabbath rest with the eternal rest. Believers enter through Christ. The creation week then becomes a prophetic pattern woven into God's redemptive plan. Now, what are some objections, some considerations here to discuss? Some Christians suggest that the days of Genesis might represent long ages, citing 2 Peter 3, "With the Lord, 1 day is 1,000 years, but 1,000 years is 1 day." But notice here, Peter's point is not to redefine day, but to show God's transcendence over time. The verse highlights more of God's patience, not the length of creation days. This can sometimes be taken out of context when it shouldn't be taken out of context. There's another argument that Genesis 1 is a more poetic or even symbolic. While the chapter, it does carry a certain rhythm to it, Its style is more historic than it is poetic. Unlike Psalms or Proverbs, it presents a chronological sequence and more specific details that read like history and not like a metaphor, like Psalms and Proverbs potentially do, to kind of give you that distinction. So why does this matter today? Why is this important? In our culture, the question of origin is more than academic. If we lose confidence in the opening chapters of Scripture, it weakens the foundation for the rest of the Bible. Genesis establishes truths about God as a creator, humanity's identity, the entrance of sin into the world through Adam, and the promise of redemption. These are all foundational for the entire understanding of Scripture, and I believe for your entire true belief system. Genesis is only symbolic. When does history in the Bible truly begin? Does that make sense? Very important to understand this for what it says in Scripture and not interject our own opinions. We've got to take Scripture at face value. If we get this wrong, then this sort of throws off the rest of Scripture. You can find your way back, but it's very important to go to the beginning, understand the beginning, and from the beginning you can build and build and build. Now, believing in 6 literal days also affirms the authority of Scripture. God did not stutter in his word. If he says he created in 6 days, our task is not to adjust his word to fit modern theories, which you can see all over the world at a rapid rate, and that will continue to increase, it says in Revelation, as we get closer to the end times. But you're here, so to trust that his word is true, that's what we're meant to do. Even when it challenges human wisdom, most important thing, and one of the greatest tools of Satan, is logic. I am a big believer in logic. When it comes to Scripture, there is logic, but you've got to understand parts. There are parts there where faith comes in, dealing with a supernatural power, not human understanding. We can only understand as high as we can understand with our intellect, with our human brains. We're not supernatural. We're not creators of a universe. So we have to be careful when we're trying to challenge things, because our logic can get us in trouble and get us twisted to where we may form a way to not believe in any of these things at all. So it's very important to keep that structured, keep it in context, always go back to Scripture. Now, in conclusion, wrap all this up, trusting the Creator is the most important thing. Did God really create the world in 6 literal days? According to the plain reading of Scripture, at face value, supported by the testimony of the Old Testament and the New Testament, the answer would be yes. The 6 days of creation reflect God's power, his order, and his sovereignty. That's sovereign purpose. They provide the foundation for our work and rest, our understandings of humanity, and our trust in his word. As believers, we are meant to follow that word. We see this in Psalms. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all their host. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. In the end, the 6 days of creation, they're not about the age of the earth, but they're about the authority of the God who created the earth. Very important to understand. Hopefully this was helpful. I encourage you, as always, sign up for the newsletter. You'll find links in the description. With deeper studies, a little bit deeper community we have going on over there. And if you'd like to keep going and you'd like to keep learning, you can click into the next episode in the playlist. I'll see you in the next one.